Have you ever wondered why, no matter what year it is, movie theaters always seem to be full of sequels, reboots, and superhero films that feel strangely familiar? It's not just your imagination. The film industry has been stuck in a loop for decades, and while it might frustrate fans looking for originality, there's actually a very logical reason behind it. To understand this, we have to go back a bit, way before Marvel, Disney remakes, or even the rise of Netflix. Back in the 1920s and 1930s, Hollywood was a wild, chaotic place. There were no established rules for what made a hit movie, and studios were constantly experimenting. Some films bombed, some became unexpected blockbusters, and the success of any movie was almost entirely unpredictable. Imagine being a studio executive back then. You could spend $100,000 on a movie only for it to flop completely. One year, musicals were all the rage. The next, gangster films dominated the box office. There was no formula, no playbook, just gut instincts, star power, and a little bit of luck. This chaos led to a very simple realization. Studios hated taking risks. Because the difference between success and failure could mean millions lost or millions earned, they started looking for patterns. And what they found was kind of obvious. If a certain type of movie made money once, making it again was way safer than trying something completely new. The 1970s and 1980s were the turning point. Suddenly, films like Jaws and Star Wars changed everything. Take Star Wars, for example. George Lucas created something utterly unique in 1977. A space opera with aliens, lasers, and a hero's journey unlike anything audiences had seen before. But here's the thing. Once it made $775 million worldwide, studios noticed a pattern. Audiences loved a universe they could return to, characters they could follow, and stories that could be expanded. And thus, the franchise era was born. Instead of gambling on an entirely new idea, studios realized they could invest in sequels and spin-offs. The risk was lower because the brand was already familiar to the audience. You didn't have to convince people to buy a ticket for a story they had never heard of. You just had to convince them it was worth returning to. By the 1990s, the stakes in Hollywood had gotten even higher. Big-budget blockbusters were no longer $20 million affairs. They were $100 million experiments. Every decision mattered, because if a movie flopped, the studio could lose enough money to threaten its entire slate for the year. Let's break it down with an example. Imagine a studio spends $150 million to make a movie. On top of that, marketing costs, trailers, posters, interviews, international campaigns could add another $50 to $100 million. That means the studio is invested $200 to $250 million before the film even hits theaters. Now, if that movie is an original story that audiences haven't seen before, the odds of it making back that money are slim. If it's a sequel to a known hit, however, the odds are much better. Even if the film isn't perfect, there's a built-in audience willing to pay for the experience. It's cold, hard math, but it's the reality of modern Hollywood. Risk-averse decision-making isn't about creativity, it's about survival. It's not just dollars and cents. Psychology plays a huge role too. Humans are wired to prefer things they already know. Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect. The more you see something, the more likely you are to like it. That's why movie trailers often show familiar faces, recurring characters, or plot points that feel comfortable. Think about superhero movies. By now, we've seen dozens of iterations of the classic hero's journey. The villain gets a dramatic backstory, The hero faces a crisis, the city is in danger, and there's a big final showdown. Why do audiences still pay to see it? Because the formula works. It's familiar, satisfying, and triggers that same emotional response over and over again. Studios know this instinctively. They don't need to reinvent the wheel. They just need to keep audiences in that comfort zone while tweaking enough elements to make it feel fresh. The late 2000s and early 2000s saw the rise of reboots. Instead of making a direct sequel, studios would take an older franchise and modernize it for a new audience. Take Spider-Man, for example. In 2002, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man kicked off the first modern superhero trilogy. By 2012, the studio rebooted it with Andrew Garfield in The Amazing Spider-Man. 4 years later, they rebooted it again with Tom Holland as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Why not just stick with one actor in one storyline? Because rebooting allows studios to 1. Update technology. CGI and special effects improve rapidly, and old films can look dated. 2. Reach a new audience. Younger viewers might not have seen the original films. 3. Correct mistakes. If a previous film was critically panned, a reboot gives the franchise a second chance. In other words, reboots are like insurance policies. They minimize risk while maximizing potential profit. Then there's the classic sequel. Studios love sequels because the math is simple. If movie 1 made money, movie 2 probably will too. Take the Fast and Furious franchise as an example. The first movie in 2001 was a modest hit, but as sequels rolled out, the profits skyrocketed. By the time Fast X hit theaters in 2023, the series had earned billions worldwide. What's fascinating is that the sequels don't always need to be as good as the original. They just need to deliver the core elements that audiences expect: cars, action, and camaraderie. Studios know this, which is why they prioritize franchises over risky, untested ideas. The rise of streaming platforms like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime Video has added a new twist. Studios aren't just looking at box office revenue anymore. They're also chasing subscriber retention. A blockbuster sequel or reboot can drive massive viewership on these platforms. For example, Disney Plus launched The Mandalorian, set in the Star Wars universe. It wasn't a sequel or a prequel. It was a brand new story, but it leveraged a familiar universe to attract subscribers. This strategy mirrors the early days of Netflix's DVD rental business. Just like Mark and Reed knew that people would pay for movies they were already interested in, studios now know that audiences are more likely to subscribe for content in worlds they already love. Hollywood today is more data-driven than ever. Before greenlighting a project, studios analyze previous box office performance of similar films, audience demographics and interests, social media buzz, and online searches. This means that if a movie type has historically performed well, studios are much more likely to invest in it again. If something hasn't worked before, it's almost guaranteed to be passed over, no matter how creative the idea. Essentially, data analytics has made the industry even more risk-averse. Sequels, reboots, and franchises are seen as safe bets, while original concepts are considered dangerous. Disney is a perfect example of this pattern in action. Between 2010 and 2025, Disney has released more than a dozen live-action remakes of classic animated films: The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, and more. Why? 1. Built-in audience. Millions of people already know and love these stories. 2. Merchandising opportunities. Familiar films sell toys, clothes, and theme park experiences. 3. Global appeal. Classic Disney films have universal recognition, reducing marketing risk. In other words, Disney isn't just making movies. They're building an ecosystem where every film is a predictable revenue generator. Original films still exist, of course, but they're the exception rather than the rule. When a studio greenlights an entirely new story, it usually comes with a lot of safeguards. Star-studded cast to attract audiences. Partnerships with streaming platforms for guaranteed revenue. Smaller budgets to limit financial risk. Take Inception, 2010, as an example. Christopher Nolan's concept was entirely original, but the studio invested heavily in marketing, casted big names like Leonardo DiCaprio, and trusted Nolan's track record to reduce risk. Even then, such projects are rare because the probability of failure is much higher than with sequels or remakes. There's another reason studios keep repeating stories. Audiences love comfort. Humans crave narrative structures they understand: heroes, villains, conflict, and resolution. That's why romantic comedies often follow the same pattern. Action films reuse the same beats, and horror movies stick to familiar tropes. It's not laziness, it's human psychology. A familiar formula gives audiences a sense of satisfaction, making them more likely to buy a ticket or subscribe to a service. Studios are simply catering to this instinct. Advances in technology have also made repeating stories more attractive. With CGI and visual effects, studios can create spectacular worlds that weren't possible before. Sequels or reboots benefit the most because the audience already cares about the characters and settings. The technology just enhances the experience. Think of Avatar, The Way of Water. James Cameron could spend $250 million creating cutting-edge underwater visuals because people already love the original Avatar. If it had been a completely new story, that level of investment would have been much riskier. The end of the day, the reason studios keep making the same movies is simple. It's a safer bet. Lower financial risk, built-in audience, merchandising and licensing opportunities, streaming subscriber retention, familiar formulas that satisfy human psychology. It's a business decision, not necessarily a creative one. And yet, this doesn't mean creativity is dead. Original ideas still break through, sometimes in unexpected ways. Get Out, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse all prove that originality can succeed when done smartly. Looking forward, studios will likely continue relying on sequels, reboots, and franchises. But as streaming platforms grow and international markets become increasingly important, there may be more room for calculated risk. Think about it. A smaller budget, original movie released directly to a streaming service can find its niche audience without risking a $200 million loss. This could slowly shift the balance, allowing more originality to coexist with familiar franchises. So, the next time you see yet another superhero sequel or a Disney remake, remember, it's not because studios are lazy. It's because they've learned over decades that this strategy works. It's the Netflix-style bet. They know people will pay for what they recognize and love. And in the high-stakes world of Hollywood, that's the smartest bet of all. Studios keep making the same movies because of a mix of financial reasoning, human psychology, technological advancements, and the historical lessons of Hollywood. From the chaotic 1920s to today's data-driven blockbusters, the story is consistent. If it worked once, it'll probably work again. That doesn't mean originality is dead. It's just rare, risky, and requires smart execution. But understanding why the same stories keep coming back can give you a new appreciation for the choices studios make. So next time you roll your eyes at another superhero movie or a remake of a classic, remember, the studios aren't being lazy. They're just playing the numbers game. And in Hollywood, numbers rule everything. Have you noticed any original films lately that surprised you? Comment below and let us know your favorite risky movie that actually paid off.